Dave Monk, Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. This is Sunday, December the 16th, 2018, and this is the Prairie Monk program, WEFT's weekly look at rails, trails, greenways, and conservation, and all sorts of great stuff, and whatever else that Dave has been up to for the last 7 days.
It's a busy period. I've been at the square again. It's interesting. We take T-shirts and cards, but basically talking to people who have an interest in prairie preservation, take fairly large pictures, put them out against the wall, and it's and I'm a prairie monk, but sometimes I'm a kind of embarrassed to be the prairie monk. You have to wonder about being a symbol for things. I didn't take a chair, so it wasn't easy to sit down. But I had help to come in. Mick Wolf helped me in, and others helped me out. And we have old card tables, which are kind of heavy. But they're interesting people, and they're interested people. And one next-door neighbor had very interesting small wire, copper wire trees in a circle, and some of them had roots. And I thought that was rather fun and interesting, and it sent me back to Wesley Jackson in Kansas, who took his people's farm property back, and is a very interested agronomist who is interested in sustainability and different species. And we've been there with Bill Saylor, and so Wesley Jackson took over a village and the school gymnasium and places for grad students to stay and work with the farm. He has a daughter who is working with Northern Iowa University and has become replaced Darrell Jackson, who's retired from Darrell Smith, who has retired. And that university has a lot of prairie around its grounds and has a graduate program, undergraduate program, and Wesley Jackson's daughter is there. But I was reminded by the person next door that the daughter, in her managing this prairie unit and students, her specialty is to take a large, say 1 foot wide PVC pipe and plant it in the ground, and then plant a prairie plant in the soil that's in that PVC pipe, and then let it grow for a number of years, and then to take that plant out and wash out the roots and to the extent of having perhaps a mile of rootlets, then 18 foot deep perhaps. And she could then take that specimen to talks, roll up the roots, and so it reminded me when next to someone who was doing the upper parts of plants that and some of her work also had rootlets, and I thought we had a conversation about that, and it's that sort of thing that makes the market on the square interesting. Next door on the other side was a couple from Paris, and very returning to a farm situation with a ditch, and the concept of putting prairie on the ditch, but having to deal with people on the other side of the ditch that have a very different attitude to drainage ditches and eliminating water. And so we had this conversation about birds, and they had been involved with a bird count in June. We're used to a bird count in December, a Christmas, autumn, and birds count. It's very well known. But this was a different one. It was in June, and you had to work a transect, and every so often you had to stop and figure out what birds you were encountering there, mostly by sound, and then that would be repeated time and again, perhaps by the same people, but perhaps by other people, to try and figure out what was going on with the birds in the Paris area. Just those sorts of conversations are very helpful. They range into talking to people who are biochemists and working with RNA, DNA, and people who are more oriented to crafts and art, and so I find it rather productive to be there and talking to each other. Talking often is very, very helpful. The Paris people, the husband had a very healthy beard, and that is often fun to be with at Christmas time. And they are near to the Penn Central line that ran from Paris to Decatur, probably about 60 mile long, and we really knew that line had a lot of prairie on it, and unfortunately it's gone back to agriculture, and that large amount of prairie remaining will be lost forever. So we talk about these things and how you work with drainage commissioners whose responsibility is for getting water off the area, and generally speaking, I appreciate the fact that Urbana still has its Lincoln Square and can attract quite a large group of people who were actually buying items fairly freely. So our role is more to be there as a community non-profit, just to remind people that prairie is out there and it's almost an endangered species. And so the pictures I take are of sometimes the original Kickapoo Trail before there was a trail, and then the trail after it was very wide and took out a lot of prairie. The debate about east of St. Joe, which might be the next phase to figure on how we can perhaps have a slightly narrower trail and save some prairie between the interurban and the main line. Pictures of the trails that we have worked with, city of Monticello, from Monticello across the Sangamon River and then extending to County Farm Road and further around to Applewood, where the new Monticello Library is. And then we have been discussing fairly extensively the piece of 4 miles between Applewood Road and Cisco. Could that be a trail or not a trail? Could it be a walkway that would continue through to the east side of the Sangamon River and back into Monticello? So lots of opportunities there for further discussion. There's the possibility of shared road on old Route 47, which was a highway and wide enough and low traffic enough to encourage the adjacency. So I take pictures to let people see, and we add those each week to give you an idea of what we're talking about. We take a map that's been very helpful. It shows us our 33 miles of railroad bed that is available for its soil and its prairie. It's difficult in some places. There's a good picture of one farm invasion right across our railroad bed that takes out the soil and the plants that we would preserve. So how do you work with the farming community? And so many of the people I was talking to are of farming background. And there's a realization that you need this gene pool. Silkscreen printing comes up a lot because we have prints of silkscreen printing. And I might say a little bit more about that later, but silkscreen prints have been rather helpful to us, whether it has been for T-shirts or for, we did dresses at one stage, and framed art. We did a high contrast so that you could put your own imagination into the image, and we involved people in teams because silkscreen printing can be that way of getting people together and talking to each other, and so we might, if I have time, I'll jump further with silkscreen printing just to remind you that it is a fairly easy way of doing art. After I'd loaded up, I went to the co-op and bought some hummus and walked into the area where they have a cooking school, and there's artwork on the wall. We at one stage had quite a bit to do with suggesting that the artwork be in a cage, because if you're dealing with food, you often have fat content, and that particular room didn't have a very good evacuation system. So if you're thinking about artists and how they preserve the dignity of their art, is you try to prevent fat or other items in the air from getting on their artwork, and so that's worked. There's a nice display cage, and 2 people occupy that every month. And the co-op asks periodically for people who would want to be exhibited there, and so I took my hummus and sat down in an easy chair and talked to Holly Courier, who wanted to remind me that in 10 minutes there would be a food school. And Holly is in charge of the red herring, and they are vegan people, and they get a lot of attention. And so this was a red herring presentation to looking at vegan food. And I sat there and I really enjoyed watching the first part of that show. I really didn't belong to the 10 or so people that were there, but I got a feeling that for the food and the cooking and the people involved. And so credit to the co-op for doing that sort of thing. They sell Heartland Pathways coffee, and we get a $1 for every sale there is, and it's just very friendly and very near to other parts of the market. This week I was at the Idea store, which has moved to Lincoln Square, and I think it's doing very well. And I was delivering the cores of telephones. I end up being the salvage person for lots of different things, but the computer hardware often looks like a small city if you turn it upside down. And it's rather popular amongst artists. So I took a big box of those sorts of things to the Idea Square and the Idea store. And I also took a bunch of hangers. When we were doing silkscreen printing, we needed lots of hangers we dried our ink instead of having an ultraviolet tunnel for drying things instantly. We would dry them and they would hang for a period, so they dried themselves. And so I took extra hangers to another second-hand store which is nearby, and they took them, and they're the sort of thing that people can use without having to go buy new plastic hangers. And so I delivered those. Lincoln Square has had its moments. They don't quite know what to do with the hotel, and so it's in consideration at the moment. But some of the spaces, I think there's 3 churches there, and people go in and out because it was an early mall and very innovative. It closed off streets, including Broadway and Green Street, And so at the time it was known as Juma's Hotel, and we hope that will retain some of the relationship between Champaign and Urbana, and it's very close to the outdoor market, which bounces into the indoor market later in the year. I left the Red Herring co-op food session, and I got a phone call from Kim Campbell, who came and helped me resurrect a light. And so those sorts of little helpful things are what makes life interesting. And so I encourage that over the week, Kaldeeper, from an Indian background, came and helped sort out cards that were bought by people at the fair, and so just that sort of back and forth and putting things in order is very helpful. It's not easy to handle a lot of volunteers in our case, because the things we need most is how do you work with foundations like the Land Conservation Foundation that Bruce Hannon runs. We need to be able to sort out a 10-page document where you're trying to work your way through things to making it a simple document and to get there in time. And that's not easy to introduce to volunteers who may not know what we're doing with prairie preservation. The sort of volunteers we sometimes really need are accountants and people who know tax bases and how we can work with not-for-profit organizations and 501c3s, which is a tax exemption. It's an awful lot of details that you almost need a coordinator that knows how to go to the county and check up on your deeds, go to legal situations and figure out how to preserve the dignity of the little pieces of prairie that are left. And it's hard to move and shake that sort of volunteerism as compared with having something to do that's interesting for a few hours. So you're looking for people who will be committed and might even be committed for years. A little bit like places like WEFT, where you have at least some people who have been here for many, many years and know enough about the details of tower repair or maintenance, how to handle computerization. So you look for volunteers that can understand that. But it's nice to know that people come by who have been involved in organizations like the Natural Areas Study Group, and there was a folk who we encounter because we have to have a link to the internet, and that comes through the Falk family, and so we talk back and forth. One member of that family is Colombian in background, with two small girls at the moment, and just to understand that in the background there's people that we know otherwise that are in Colombia and move into the rainforest, perhaps have to deal with Venezuela. And the situation there that means that people are migrating to Colombia. You have to think about the Andes and the range that runs down the coast of South America, Peru. You have to know that there is tropical areas at one end and a Panama Canal. And when you have a tropical areas, the range of species is much higher. There's a wonderful range of bird life, and then you go south to Peru and Patagonia, and those places that are extremely cold and dangerous to work with. Just understanding the range of people that we have in this community that come from those places, and each day we listen to the agricultural reports, and you realize that Brazil is a mid-latitude organization or a mid-latitude country where corn and soybeans grows the same way as it does here. And how do we work with China, and how do we work with India and other places? It expands your mind so that you better able to talk outside your specific community. I grew up in a community that was very small. It had a post office and a hall and a church and a one teacher school, and that you can be very insulated there. You can be born there and grow up there and pass on and be very much a part of that community. But it sometimes means that your perspective of the rest of the world is rather limited. And some of the younger people in those sorts of situations move away and think about traveling around the world, perhaps. Then they get to be at a certain point and discover that they are interested in the local situation and never do go around the world. But they have developed a perspective that brings something new and interesting to those communities. And we have those people here doing very, very interesting things, and that's what I find is helpful. At this time of the year, you think about your own community, and Christmas in Australia. It's very high temperatures. You're eating on the veranda, looking out over the mountains that are part of the Great Divide that runs down the east side of Australia. You have a Christmas tree, and this Christmas tree is not a evergreen, it's a casuarina, which has some of the elements of the structure of a traditional tree from the north, where it's cold at winter time. My mother was from Cockney, London, so her background was in a different climate. She would air the sheets that were washed out, because that's what you did when they didn't dry very well in a humid climate. Well, our climate was drier, and you didn't need to do that. So there was just at Christmas time, we got friends and relatives from Sydney. My father grew up in Sydney, and we would have oranges, and this is a time of year when plants were producing their fruit and vegetables, and we would box oranges especially up and send them to Sydney, and some of those people would come to be with us at Christmas time. There were carols. My father, who was aware that a family across the river was bedbound with rheumatoid arthritis, and so he would put a phonograph on the veranda, and those people could hear it across the river, and you could almost hear the reverberations from the mountains around. And so the tree would be decorated with rather traditional European decorations. There would be fun things like crackers. You pull them apart and they make a noise. You would have dunce caps and streamers and so we had a tree on the veranda, and so my mind goes back, and at this time you think about the people that you knew then that have long since gone, including my parents. The older you get, the more you often appreciate your parents and what they did and where they came from, and how they interacted with each other, and how they taught you to do things. How my father and mother met up, and my father became a school teacher, but we had a little farm, and 10 or so cows of various age and various background, various breeds. We had Jersey cows, which are tremendously friendly, and we had an Illawarra Shorthorn, which is a breed that is very large. It's a little bit like a Friesian. We had a Friesian, and all these cows had different personalities. The Friesian cow was rather shy, and we would encourage her involvement, whereas the other cows were pets and would come poke their nose up and under your arm and be anxious to have the area behind their horns scratched, or it just growing up like that was to me an experience. So I remember it at this time of the year. I used to play tennis with my brother. We were buddies. We had a little creek called Wishy-Washy Creek. It came off the hill, which was called Tipperary. And it gives you an idea that it had some Irish background. A little washy creek, we could dam it a little and then have a race and have the water running a wheel and simulating what you would do with the traditional mill that ground grain and sawed lumber. There were picnics that each year the school would have a picnic, and the other schools would be involved, and you'd have flat races and in the horse paddock. The paddock being the alternative for a field. And when you were riding your horse to school, you had to put your horse in the horse paddock. I was growing up in an era when vehicles were being more used than horses, so the horse paddock was not as used, and it could be mown and made into running tracks. And you would do things like you'd have a tire, and one child would get inside the tire, and then you would bowl it. So you would have a group of people just enjoying the fun of being able to roll that tire 100 yards to a win. And interestingly, there was recently a little sculpted piece in downtown Champaign, which had a child reading a book, but inside a tire. You had races where you tied one foot together with somebody else's foot, and I forget, a three-legged race is what they were called. Then you had races where you got into a chaff bag, a three-bushel bag, and you had to run with that encumbrance. Just fun things that you remember. There was always food, and lots of food, and so I remember Australia, and the slight guilt of leaving my family with my siblings and my parents, and doing things here that I've found interesting to do and productive. But there was always one leg in Australia and one leg here, and you have to think about that. And then you have to think about people who are in that situation over and over. Someone who comes from Denmark and is an academic here, but the family is back in Denmark, or and you have to balance those things, and it's not always easy. And I recently was talking to my sister, and she was saying that my mother especially missed my presence. When they were building a house, their only house, I did a lot with my mother and my father to figure out what they wanted to do with the only house they would ever have. And so I had grown fairly close to the family, and then came to the U.S. and didn't go back for 10 years. And so you feel a little sad that you have left that, and you hope that what you do balances against that. And so this is a time for thought. It's also a very busy time because it's Christmas time, and people doing interesting things and meeting with each other in something the same way. We have relatives in Chicago that all the family get together, and I miss that because I just don't enjoy anymore driving to Chicago and handling Harlem and Route 80, and so the alternative is here to be with people who you love and have grown up to know in this country. So I wanted to say, if we have time, let's have a look at 20 minutes. 20 minutes? I wanted to say something about silkscreen printing, because it comes up at this time of year because people do buy prints and T-shirts and the like. Why did we get into silkscreen printing? It's a fairly simple way of reproducing art. If you, the principle of it is that if you take a piece of brown paper and you make a cut in it, and then you have ink and you squeegee that ink across the opening, then the paper that's underneath that's receiving the print will be that little cut in the newspaper or the brown paper will be printed. And you can do that with young children. You can take a little piece of cardboard and you can take a piece of brown paper and take their hand and squeegee the paint across, and they're amazed that you're making a print. You can get a little bit better than that. You can make a house or a tree or a bird or a landscape by cutting holes in the paper. But then the next step up from that is to have a silk screen which tends to hold little pieces together. You can imagine if you make something like an E and it has a hole in the middle of it, then it needs to be structured so that it can be held. So one of the things you do is you can paint a glue onto your silk and leave openings through which you can print with ink or paint. The more modern type of silkscreen printing can get more sophisticated, where you have steel instead of silk, and you can print on bottles and footballs or whatever. But this is, as you get a little bit more sophisticated, you build yourself a silkscreen press, and you make sure that it's got stops on it so that you put the paper in, and then you have a hinged frame with silk across it, and you can put the silk down on the paper and squeegee. As you get better, you know how to block it off so that it doesn't leak around the edges. And then you get to the point where you can have half a dozen people working on it as a team. And you have a proper table, and you have blockers so that when you put your paper in, it registers. And then when you change colors with a different screen, you can register the color so that it doesn't look like a bagged comic strip that's not been printed properly. So that registration is important. So you have a team that one puts the paper in, there's someone who has a pedal and it pushes the screen up, and you have a little stand which allows the screen to be up. Somebody can provide the ink, and the ink needs to be the right consistency so that it doesn't dry out and fill up all those pores in the silk. Then you have someone who has a strong arm who can take the squeegee. It's usually a rubber squeegee with very straight edges, and you squeegee it across when the silk press is put down, and then you lift that up, and somebody has to take that out and hang it on a dryer to allow it to dry slowly. So there's a difference between making some modern prints that are very rubbery and you can feel them, and this is letting the ink sink into the paper. So the quality of paper that you use is important. And if the screen is not blocked off totally well, then it might burst and leave you a little mark that you don't want. So the edges of your silk screen should be clear and and free of glitches like that. We tend to pay a lot of attention to the image that we take. We're interested in high contrast materials, so you can take photographs, you squint your eye and see what you see in the distance, and see whether it might be something that would print in high contrast, so that people can put their own imagination into this. And so that is what you're silk screening with a team of half a dozen people, and it can be fun. Even when there's a mistake, someone will call it out, and then you have to wash this screen with petroleum-based material, and fix up the leak that you have, and you have a hairdryer to dry that situation off. You have a vacuum under the paper, so it pulls the paper flat and keeps it in registration. These are all little things that you can do with a regular vacuum cleaner, and it's not very expensive. If we pushed, we could even go out into the street and print on the street. If somebody is going to invade our territory and we want to make sure that they know that this is not just a bunch of weeds, we will get out in the street with a print that says no mow, or herbicide, or please don't destroy that situation, and we just squeegee it onto corrugated plastic that will last for 3 years sometimes, and we do that quickly to meet a situation that is difficult. And prints are different. It's changed. The whole process has changed, because now practically everyone can take a picture of their own, and if you don't make a picture of your own, you can get it off the internet. So whereas we have had lots of frames to frame our pictures and sell them, that is no longer something that you can do. Every once in a while, you'll do a piece of art which is unique and it will still sell. But the second-hand stores are full of frames and mats and other pieces of equipment that were wonderful 20 years ago, but are gone by now. You go get your number 6 or number 10 telephone, and you'll be able to scroll and show pictures to your friends and relatives, and so it's a different era, and artists tend to be everywhere, rather than to have a Picasso here and a few artists that are well established. We still have those artists, whether they're dramatic artists or they're music people, or the internet has not destroyed that. It's allowed a lot of people to be involved in a lot more things and a lot more thinking, and we honor that. It has its glitches. It sort of takes us out of the era of specialty, but the specialty is still there. I was talking to someone who is a biochemist who is dealing with DNA repair. When you get to that, you're a specialist. You're doing interesting things. That's a different sort of art. But it's an era where we're changing. Some of the things that we try to preserve are disappearing at a rapid rate, so that young people are beginning to realize that they're going to have much less natural area to work with than their grandparents. And so you do have people who commit themselves to doing preservation work, whether it be in Los Angeles or Colorado or where have you. And we do try to do some of that here. David and Bill Saylor, the two people have helped me do things on radio and on television and YouTube, have been part of that sort of team that helps us to take information to people. And sometimes you think it's a little unsophisticated. You hear me talking now and sort of ad-libbing, but it comes from knowing a lot of background and trying to put it together. So we need those people who can look at what we do and say we can simplify this and make it into a linear discussion, whereas we're rather gestalt. It takes a lot of talent to bridge those two paradigms of psychology, to have a simple situation where you can control the variables and see what the outcome is, whereas if I'm often ad-libbing on perhaps 25 or 30 different lines of thought, and how do you control yourself and bring that together and make it reasonable. And over I am running into people who say, we enjoy that sort of thought, we have the same sort of thinking ourselves, and it's nice to be able to hear how you do it and how we might be able to do it too. And some of what we do is encouraging others to do that. Just to have a natural area study group that can go out to a natural area on a Tuesday and once a month, I think it is, and then come back to town and be able to talk that interesting experience, and an experience that they've had with a person who's been enlisted to tell them what's going on, and spread that word around. So same with the Grand Prairie Friends. They've acquired land and over the years got more sophisticated. So I encourage you to be involved with those people that you feel are doing interesting things, or do interesting things yourself, and don't be afraid to think about doing that and communicating with others as best you can. WEFT has done that for years. They've been at it for over 30 years, and it's not easy. But it has brought a lot of music people especially together, and I just raked out of the annals a little article about Kent McConkey. And Kent McConkey was here for many years. He knew people. He would fundraise in an excellent manner, and he was just unique. And at one stage, I think that the WEFT had to encourage him to use more than 18 records. But it continued with John Coleman, and then with the present person, and You may have some comments.
Well, my first show on WEFT was the time slot after the Old Timer. So I was on. That was one of the great things about WEFT. You'd have his 3 hours of old time country music, and then before I came along, it was 2 hours of ska, which is up tempo reggae, and then I came in and I just played a mismatch of all sorts of music. But then I moved to Fridays, and other stuff moved in after hit that time slot. And I'm completely blanking on the name. Kurt Paul.
Yes.
Is the person who currently, people should know, if you tune in on Saturday nights and you wonder what happened to the 5 to 8, country music and rockabilly. He has moved, and he's actually now on Saturday mornings. Yeah, he's on Saturday mornings now rather than Saturday night. So that's the time to catch him from like 6 to 8 in the morning, I think is now his time slot.
I think they're running, the evening program is on...
It's automated right now, yeah.
Yes.
And wouldn't you know it, I'm right back there on that time slot after him again, because that's where the Grateful Dead now is, and I'm the coordinator for that time slot.
I think that's important because the people that John Coleman and Kent and others got together listened at that time of day, I think. So we need to keep that slot.
Well, on the other hand, my old time slot on Friday is now hip-hop. So that's quite different from what I used to do. So that is one of the good things about WFT. We've got what we've got, and we can be very consistent, and it has longevity. But times change, and maybe time slots need to change too. And you've got 30 seconds, by the way. It's almost noon.
That's all the time we have. But I was meeting people who had been with WEFT many years ago at the mall, and this whole mismatch of getting people together is of interest to me. This is Dave Monk of Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. As always, the views and opinions expressed are solely those of the speakers and no one else.